that, well, they're going to rule America. So that's the top tier. The second tier are the technicians, the scientists, the professionals, the executives of the large corporations. They are the ones who keep the economy working. They're going to keep business running and keep the motors running. And then below them is everybody else. The dumbed down masses who will be taught to accept their fate, to be on the same par with the Mexicans and the Chinese, because, let's face it, the American worker is earning too much money. He's got to settle for much less. And we've got to train him to accept that. Let me read to you from a speech given by a top professor at Harvard University, Anthony Obe2. He addressed 52 executives in Northern Telecom's worldwide corporation in 1981. And this is what he said in the speech. You see, the educators have to prepare the business community for this new system, this new pyramidal type of society with the elite at top running everything and the pros at the bottom. And he says this, he says, quote, the present traditional concept of literacy has to do with the ability to read and write. But the real question that confronts us today is, how do we help citizens function well in their society? How can they acquire the skills necessary to solve their problems? Do we really want to teach people to do a lot of sums or write in a fine round hand when they have a $5 handheld calculator or a word processor to work with? Or do we really have to have everybody literate, writing and reading in the traditional sense, when we have the means through our technology to achieve a new flowering of oral communications? It is the traditional idea that says certain forms of communication, such as comic books, are bad, but in the modern context of functionalism, they may not be all that bad. Isn't that interesting? Now, I asked her, how many parents send their kids to school to learn to read comic books? He says they're perfectly fine for our people. They can read comic books. That's the level that he sees. Now, do we really want to teach these children, as he says, to do a lot of sums or writing a fine round hand? But he's saying, no, we really don't want to teach these kids these basic skills. That's what he's saying. We don't want to do it. Now, they're saying we don't want to do it, but they're not quitting their jobs. If I didn't want to lecture, I wouldn't go on a lecture tour, would I? I'd quit, I'd do something else. But if I didn't want to lecture and stood before you and forced you to listen to me, say dribble, you'd think I was crazy. Here are men who don't want to do the teaching, don't want to teach the basic skills, but they want you to keep them in their jobs. They want you to keep them teaching their kids. What are they going to teach if they're not going to teach the basic skills? As he says here, do we really have to have everybody literate? Well, what's the answer? No, we don't have to have everybody literate. Only 20%. That's all. The rest can be pros. The rest will do our bidding, the way the Egyptians ran their society. That's what they're saying. Do we really have to have everybody literate? Isn't it interesting, in this country, everybody was literate when this nation was founded. Our forefathers were reading the Federalist Papers. They were reading the Declaration of Independence. They were reading the Constitution. Recently, I attended an auction permanent stick. And incidentally, Stick is now working with the Department of Labor, this individual. Let me read what he said, what they said in 1987. Quote, "Many companies have moved operations to places with cheap, relatively poorly educated labor. What may be crucial, they say, is the dependability of a labor force and how well it can be managed and trained, not its general educational level. Although a small cadre of highly educated, creative people is essential to innovation and growth. Ending discrimination and changing values are probably more important than reading and moving low-income families into the middle class." What he's saying here is, hey, America, you better give up this idea of an American dream where you start in the low class and you rise to the middle class. You better give up that dream. You better give it up. Because we're not going to teach you reading. Reading is going to be restricted to a small cadre of highly educated, creative people. They are going to be, he says that that's essential to innovation and growth. Inventors are not necessarily members of the elite. Invention comes out of many people, all sorts of people. Well-educated, college graduates, some never got to college, some barely graduated high school. So you can see the elitist mentality that is now running things. And this man Stick, Thomas Stick, is now working with Robert Reich. You heard that? Robert Reich. That's the way Rush Limbaugh pronounced it. Incidentally, how many ditto heads are here tonight? Hey, fantastic. The point is that these are the people in control. They've got every state legislature to enact an education program which is going to do exactly this. You see, that's what's happening. And they're pulling the wool over your eyes. They tell you, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, Outcome-based education. Outcome-based education. I did it in my latest newsletter, the September issue, which is on press at the moment. It's about Benjamin Bloom. He's the professor. I call him the godfather of obe2 because it is his research and his writings which are behind the whole outcome-based education movement. It is his graduate students and his associates who are now promoting outcome-based education and implementing it in every state of the union. Now, Benjamin Bloom was responsible for writing or creating, he and some collaborators, something called the taxonomy of educational objectives, or taxonomy of educational goals. The idea for this taxonomy, incidentally, it's called Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. The idea for this taxonomy goes back to 1954. That's how far back they started thinking about research. Because they realized this, they said, we want to create a humanist society. We want to create little humanists. So we've got to have a curriculum that will create humanists. And so they said, okay, let's start with what we want. We want little humanists. What kind of a curriculum will create humanists? And that's what the taxonomy is supposed to do. It gives you a curriculum that will create humanists. Now, the Catholics want to create good Catholics. So they have in their Catholic schools a curriculum that supposedly produces good Catholics. The curriculum isn't what it used to be, but at one time they were very successful. One time they were very successful. problems to things in the Bible, like the size of Noah's Ark, or how long did this particular biblical character live, etc., generations. That's how you create your goals for your education system. Well, American education, until the turn of the century at least, was basically, as far as the goals were concerned, it was to create a good American citizen. That's what they said, a good American citizen who could read and write intelligently, could vote, and participate in our form of government. That seemed to be what they wanted, and that was easily done. All you had to do was, salute the American flag, the Pledge of Allegiance. You learn the Constitution, you learn American history, you learn to love the Founding Fathers. You became an American. The purpose of the American public school system was to produce an American. An American. Well, all of that's changed now. The humanists have taken it over, and what they want to produce is a humanist citizen of the world. And so they've created a curriculum that's going to do exactly that. And of course, they have this methodology, mastery learning, in which they are going to train children, just like Pavlov dogs, to become exactly what they want these individuals to become. Now, Bloom wrote, for example, this taxonomy, and I'm quoting Bloom now, he says, this taxonomy is designed to be a classification of the student behaviors. You have to realize now that these are psychologists who think, behavioral psychologists who think in terms of observable behavior. For example, if you read a book, they want you to behave in a way that shows that you've absorbed something in this book. Now, as you and I know, that when you read a book, you don't behave any differently, do you? Unless you read a book that is so astounding and changes your behavior so radically that you do something that shows a change in behavior. But it's pretty hard to find out, in behavioral terms, what you're learning, basically. But they think in terms of behaviors because they are behaviorists and they want to see evidence. They want to see observable evidence that you have learned what they are teaching. So he says this taxonomy is designed to be a classification of the student behaviors which represent the intended outcomes of the educational process. They want proof that what they are doing is working. What we are classifying is the intended behavior of students, the ways in which individuals are to act, think, or feel as a result of participating in some unit of instruction. How are they going to know how you feel? How are they going to know how you think? That's the most private part of the individual. You know how they do that? They have devised the most ingenious tests, which if you take will reveal what's inside you. They know how to do it. They've been working at this for years. These tests. He goes on. The taxonomy is not completely neutral. This stems from the already noticed fact that it is a classification of intended behaviors. By educational objectives, we mean explicit formulations of the ways in which students are expected to be changed by the educative process. That is, the ways in which they will change in their thinking, their feelings, and their actions. It is important that the major objectives of the school or unit of instruction be clearly identified. If time and effort are not to be wasted on less important things, and if the work of the school is to be guided by some plan. The philosophy of education of the school serves as one guide. So they've got a philosophy of education. Since the objectives to be finally included should be related to the school's view of the, quote, good life for the individual in the good society. Well, that's right out of the Humanist Manifesto. purpose of education is to live a good life, they call it. Then he asks, what are important values? What is the proper relation between man and society? What are the proper relations between man and man? You'll notice he doesn't ask what is the relationship between man and God, because that's strictly not in his taxonomy. Now, he talks a great deal about the cognitive domain, the kind of knowledge that the kids will be expected to acquire. And he gives a sample of some of the kinds of knowledge they must acquire. Quote, to develop a basic knowledge of the evolutionary development of man. A knowledge of the forces past and present which have made for the increasing interdependence of people all over the world. Interdependence, world government. Knowledge of a relatively complete formulation of the theory of evolution. You won't get your certificate unless you can explain to the teacher how evolution works. And you've got to show that you believe it. You see, because if you don't believe it, then it hasn't worked. And they're going to work on you until you say, yeah, I believe in evolution. That's the only way you're going to get out of school. Because what they say is, you don't graduate until you pass our tests. Doesn't matter how long you stay in school. You could be 35. You're not going to graduate until you jump through their hoops. Now, Bill Spady, who is the top OBE guru, describes how a child or a student is supposed to demonstrate that he has learned what he is supposed to learn. Quote, he says, first, an outcome is a demonstration of learning that occurs at the end of a learning experience. It is a result of learning and an actual, visible, observable demonstration of three things. Knowledge combined with confidence, combined with something my colleagues and I call orientations. The attitudinal, affective, motivational, and relational elements that also make up a performance. Further, this demonstration happens in a real-life setting and is therefore influenced and defined by the elements and factors that make up that setting, situation, or context. So that's what every child is going to have to go through. He's going to have to demonstrate that he has fully absorbed what they do with this wonderful absorb. And if he hasn't become politically correct, he won't get his certificate. It's as simple as that. And why it is so dangerous to put a child in a public school. I know of an 8-year-old second grader in Michigan, in Camden, who hanged himself because of a film he was shown in the classroom. It took only 1 hour in the classroom to change that child's life for good. I know the mother very well, Debbie Aleppo. We've become good friends. And she told me, she said, my son was not suicidal. He just did what he had seen in the film, and he died accidentally. It was an accident. He didn't intend to kill himself. But nevertheless, that was the result because of the film that was shown. She didn't even know that he had been shown the film. She found out about it on television. On television, they had interviewed some of the kids in his class, and the kids said, oh, we know why he hung himself, because we saw this film yesterday. So Bloom is right. He's absolutely right. A single hour of classroom activity under certain conditions may bring about a major reorganization in cognitive as well as affective behavior. And that's why I tell these parents who tell me, oh, we have a wonderful Christian teacher in our school. Our school is so wonderful. I said, in those 12 years that your child is in that system, you don't know when that 1 hour will come. You don't know when that child is going to be hit by something that will change that child forever. Why learn the hard way? Why take that risk? It does not make sense. But Bloom realized how important early education was. And he says we can learn very little about human growth and development or even about specific human characteristics unless we make full use of the time dimension. Efforts to control or change human behavior by therapy, by education, or by other means will be inadequate and poorly understood until we can follow behavior over a longer period. He says the absolute scale of vocabulary development and the longitudinal studies of educational achievement indicate that approximately 50% of general achievement at grade 12 has been reached by the end of grade 3. This suggests the great importance of the first few years of school as well as the preschool period in the development of learning patterns and general achievement. The implications of more powerful and effective school environment in the primary school grades are obvious. So that's where they target the kids, the strongest and hardest of the first 3 grades. As I've told parents all over this country, they can take a perfectly healthy child and turn that child's brain into macaroni in 6 months. They know how to do it. These are scientists who've been working at it very assiduously. They know how to do it. Now let me read you what the NEA says about early childhood education. I'm reading from their resolution passed this summer at their convention in San Francisco. They said, the NEA supports early childhood education programs in the public schools for children from birth to age 8. From birth to age 8. Well, to be forewarned is to know what is going on and to deal with it, make the right decision. Now, I am going to, after this break, I will demonstrate and show you how you can teach your own children the basic skills in the right way so that they will not be victims of this system. But I pray that you will not, that if you have children in public schools, you will get them out immediately. So we'll see you right after the break. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much. We do this for those who are visiting who are here. We shake the fishbowl, and the first 2 names that we pull out, I ask Sam to pull it out, they get a free NEA book as a little prize. It's like a door prize. And then second, and also autograph your books. We'll have an autographing session at the end of the program tonight. And Sam will be able to be at the bar and just autographing the book. So, and don't talk too much about it. Just let everybody get their books autographed. So, Sam, could you just? We already should. This is not fixed. Go ahead. Okay, there's one. Oh, one more, Sam. Okay, these are just. Okay. Well, no, I don't want to do this one. Okay, no, like geez. Okay, the first one was Marty Kearney. Where is he? Okay, Marty, just go over there, back there, and you're gonna and Terry Cartwright. Terry, is there a Terry Cartwright? There he is. Okay, Terry, right over there. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to take a 20-minute break. So those who want to go and order something, fine. You want to take a look at, fine. If you want to grab Sam, talk a little bit. We're taking a 20-minute break, and we're going to start exactly at 8:30.
Language focuses on individual